This week on Act Out, let's say that someone in your neighborhood is going on a rampage, killing a bunch of neighbors and burying them in his backyard to the point that he's actually running out of room. In that case, do you say, well, geez, this is really a problem of mass grave space? What this metaphor has to do with pipelines, media literacy, and creative resistance. Next up, ICE raids and the vital intersections between workers' rights, migrant rights, and the prison-industrial complex. Finally, Tiffany Devez sits down to talk about the past, present, and future of fighting and building in El Paso. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. We start today with some really distressing news. It seems that we don't have enough fracking infrastructure. In a recent Wall Street Journal article, the authors lament that while U.S. gas production is at a record high, the infrastructure needed to move the fuel around the country hasn't kept up. I mean, what is the world coming to? You go through all of this trouble, mountaintop removal, groundwater pollution, just to squeeze precious toxic gas from a rock. And then people don't even have the common courtesy to build explosive pipelines through their homes so as to help companies move this literally worthless fuel around the country. Selfish assholes. But I can't help but feel like right in my gut that we have given a lot of time, energy, money, and irreplaceable land, air, and water to the fracking industry in terms of pipelines. Because, of course, we have. As of February of this year, Frack Tracker reported that the United States is literally crisscrossed by 300,000 miles of natural gas transmission lines, which move gas between various processing facilities, and 1.3 million miles of natural gas distribution lines, which take gas from public utilities to consumers. To put that into perspective, the entire interstate highway system of the U.S. is currently 46,876 miles long. All of the interstates. That means that there are roughly 27 times the miles of gas distribution lines than there are interstates in this country. Now, if all that is still not enough to keep up with the amount of fracking that we're doing, I think the actual problem is that we're fucking fracking too much. It's like if someone in your neighborhood is going on a rampage and just killing a bunch of people and burying them in his backyard to the point that he's actually running out of room, do you go over and say, well, geez, Bob, this is really a problem of mass grave space? No. But of course, if you're the Wall Street Journal, it is a problem of mass grave space. The ultimate goal being to sit as kings of a graveyard smoking cigars and lamenting the last drops of oil squeezed out of a choking earth into a choking sky. For instance, this article was co-written by a Ryan December, whose interests include financial markets, investing in energy, and real estate, and other Wall Street topics. Another recent article of his looks on the bright side of a potential war with Iran, writing, quote, "Shale producers stand to benefit from the oil market volatility unleashed by Thursday's attack on 2 oil tankers." You gotta hand it to the guy, he is making lemonade. Because after all, what are a few million potential deaths and many more millions of refugees? What, I ask you, is all of that when those investing in shale gas will come out on top? It feels unbelievable that folks can read these articles and honestly think, yeah, 1.3 million miles of pipeline just isn't enough. As if he mentioned how many miles of pipeline there are. But this is the media illiteracy that we're up against, padded by the slick and sly scheming of the capitalist golden boys. This is the twisted narrative that captures hearts and minds and lulls them into a drowning sleep beneath a baby mobile of fracking bits and free market fairies. It is this purposeful idiocy, intentional and insidious ignorance that we have to combat. And there is no one way to do this. There's no one story or one movie or episode that you can show someone to part the clouds of capitalism from their brains. But there is a red thread, as it were, one thing that all paradigm shifters have in common: creativity. As David Bohm noted in his work on creativity, creativity is always founded on the sensitive perception of what is new and different from what is inferred from previous knowledge. This kind of action of the creative state of mind is impossible if one is limited by narrow and petty aims, such as security, furthering of personal ambition, glorification of the individual or the state. No really creative transformation can possibly be affected by human beings, either in nature or in society, unless they are in the creative state of mind that is generally sensitive to the differences that always exist between the observed fact and any preconceived ideas, however noble, beautiful, and magnificent they may seem to be. And this is why art, creative mediums in general, are such a powerful way of connecting with people and drawing them out of their capitalist cocoons. And of course, this also speaks to how important it is that we not latch on to stale and dried up ideologies ourselves, but that we rather accept the fluidity of a changing world and allow ourselves to be wrong, to change our minds and let others do the same. And I'm not necessarily saying that we should all come up with interpretive dances on the evils of fracking to be performed outside the offices of the Wall Street Journal, although I'm not necessarily not saying that either. Headlines like these are everywhere, and people everywhere read them. At the same time, more and more people are getting activated. More and more people are standing up and locking down, sitting in, and walking out. How can we continue to cultivate this engagement? How can we reach those who are lost in the maze of capitalist propaganda and dangerous denial? How do we swat down false solutions before they gain steam and pedestal the radical and real ones that we so clearly need? Again, there isn't one answer to that question, but it is a question that we always have to ask, a question that we always have to be re-answering based on this place and this time on the front lines. This past weekend, 10 cities were targeted for a surge in ICE raids. On Monday morning, outlets across the nation reported that these increased raids didn't materialize, that the weekend was just more of the same, and that the whole point of the announcement may actually have been just to further terrorize and traumatize communities. As attorney Claudia Cuba of the Capital Area Immigrant Rights Coalition noted in an interview, it's chaotic, it's fear-mongering. It takes a toll both emotionally, psychologically, but also physically. And while this specific surge didn't happen as expected, we have to remember that ICE raids never stopped. This trauma and terror doesn't fully subside, it just ebbs and gushes. Still, this past weekend saw powerful displays of solidarity and the importance of educating and engaging vis-a-vis legal trainings. For instance, reports came that ICE agents were turned away in New York City thanks to the dissemination of Know Your Rights information, which advised people to not let ICE agents in without a warrant. Folks around the country shared and posted multilingual Know Your Rights pamphlets and sprang into action in the streets as well. For example, in Chicago on Saturday, thousands of people marched in blistering heat to protest U.S. immigration policy at Daley Plaza. In Tacoma, Washington, Willem Van Spronsen was shot and killed by police early Saturday morning as he attempted to set fire to deportation buses at the Northwest Detention Center. In a post on Sunday, the migrant rights group La Resistencia, who works with those facing deportation inside the Tacoma Center, wrote in a statement, "His actions sadly reflect the level of desperation people across this country feel about the government's outrageous violence against immigrants, which includes the use of detention centers to cage migrants both currently living in the U.S. and those seeking asylum. This death results from the federal government's unresponsiveness to the anger and despair people feel at the horrors unfolding both at the border and in the interior, and from the inability of officers to de-escalate rather than shooting to kill." In this way, Van Spronson's death personifies an important intersection that is often missed in these singular calls to abolish ICE. As Benji Hart recently wrote for Black Youth Project, any argument for the abolition of ICE can and must be extended to police, prisons, and the larger criminal justice system. All were founded for the purpose of protecting the wealth and economic interests of the elite, not the safety of the masses. ICE operates with the full support of law enforcement. Indeed, on this show, we've previously talked about how ICE and local law enforcement agencies share technologies, information, and resources. They're an interconnected system of white supremacist oppression. And we have to see them not as disparate entities, but as different faces of the same perverse system. Similarly, on July 4th, the Chapo Trap House Reddit page posted a map of every currently known U.S. concentration camp, border patrol station, and ICE detention center. The map is crowded with pins, many of which denote prisons and jails that are shared with ICE to temporarily imprison immigrants that they round up before they're deported or moved elsewhere. In short, if you're working on prison abolition and you aren't also taking on migrant detention, you're missing a very important piece of your own picture. And the same goes for those working on migrant issues who don't also work on prison abolition. The concentration camps that this country has always had, the prisons, the slave labor, they've all shifted and evolved together within the same confines of the same long-standing system that only seeks to serve and protect the white, landowning capitalist patriarchy. In order to strike at the heart of this grotesque beast, we have to see it for what it is, and not get caught up in a catchphrase movement. In a recent show of this kind of intersectional thinking, this past Thursday, Amazon workers and activists protested and disrupted the Amazon Web Services Summit in New York, rallying against Amazon's decision to provide data and cloud services to contractors working with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. As one immigrant rights activist explained, in a moment when the federal government is caging children in horrendous conditions, Amazon provides key technology and data infrastructure in order to fuel the Trump administration's deportation machine and bolstering the work of ICE. On Monday, actions continued in this same vein as Amazon celebrated its Prime Day, a sort of summer Black Friday and a special slice of hell for workers in Amazon warehouses. These serried actions throw into sharp focus the importance of intersectionality, even when it just comes to one company. Workers' rights are migrant rights, are human rights. Another time to note this overlap came last week again when the U.S. hotel chain Marriott released a statement saying, while we have no particular insights into whether the U.S. government is considering the use of hotels to aid in the situation at the border, Marriott has made the decision to decline any request to use our hotels as detention facilities. Both Hilton and Choice Hotels later echoed this statement, but it's important to note that while we should absolutely applaud businesses for refusing to be our Gestapo's errand boys, we must also consider the larger actions of the hotels with regards to workers' rights. For instance, while Marriott workers in several cities have come to agreements with the hotel chain regarding higher wages, the fight is still ongoing and includes, of course, many workers who are immigrants themselves. It's not enough to say that you won't let ICE use your hotel for the oppression of immigrants if you're already using your hotel to oppress migrants via wage theft and poor working conditions, not to mention, of course, using those same tactics on workers who aren't recent migrants. So again, yes, it is a very good thing that Marriott is not opening its doors to ICE, but we still need to stand strong in solidarity with workers and continue to choose other hotel options that are listed via fairhotel.org as socially responsible union hotels. I really cannot stress this enough. These issues are not disparate issues. They are all tied together, intricately woven threads in the giant, cruel tapestry that is U.S. imperialist capitalist systems. If we do not connect our struggles, we will always struggle and lose. For more information on what to do and who to reach out to during ICE raids, check out my post on art killing apathy from this past weekend via artkillingapathy.com/blog. The post also includes links for further information as well as graphics that you can share via social media. Now, to wrap up this week, we continue with this issue of migrant rights and growing fascism in an interview with organizer Tiffany Devez. Take a look. What is it specifically about El Paso that makes El Paso such a focal point for this?
I mean, I guess as its name suggests, it's like the past, right? So this is an area where migration has always occurred. That's like literally why we're here, why this place was, you know, it's been used for centuries, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Even before that, you know, as indigenous migration paths existed through this area as well. So, I mean, that makes it even more ironic that like so many of the migrant people that we have coming through El Paso are themselves from indigenous communities, you know, in the Americas. And this is before, you know, before this border even existed, this area was, you know, utilized as an indigenous migration path as well. So now, you know, a colonizer government is telling indigenous people that they cannot, you know, use the paths that have been used forever. Yeah, so El Paso, I think, has seen a lot of this just because it's been where people come through. And I don't know, you know, we've seen a lot of really awful things happen to migrants here, and they are continuing to happen.
Have you interacted with folks that are coming from camps or talked to people to find out what the conditions are like for them?
Yeah, so I am an organizer with Food Not Walls here in El Paso, and what we do or have done and want to continue to do is we prepare meals for migrant families that are in shelters and are passing through, getting ready to go meet their sponsors. A few of our members also provide transportation or translation services. You know, we do different things autonomously and as a group. But yeah, so we have had lots of opportunities to talk to folks that are being released from detention and are getting ready to go, you know, meet with their sponsors when we serve them meals through Food Not Walls. So I wasn't there the night that the folks that had been let out of the concentration camp they had under the bridge, the really, really bad one. I mean, they're all really, really bad, but that was an especially like egregious and horrifying thing to witness. The way that played out. I wasn't there the night that they came through the shelter where we do, or we're doing at the time, the meals that we do through Food Not Walls. But, you know, afterwards I talked to my friends and our organizers that were there, and it was so brutal. One of my friends talked to me about a little girl, and I saw, you know, they had like some photographs and video and interviews from the migrants. So there was this picture of this little girl who, I mean, everybody's hair was just like completely matted and like tangled and dirty. They were covered in dust. Yeah, they, you know, the volunteers that were working that night said that it looked like they had just come from a war zone, and you could see it on their faces. So this picture of this little girl, like, it was a short video, and she's just like staring, like shocked, you know, like you could see the shock on her, and there's adults talking around her, and she's just like not even in her body. You know, they were incredibly sick. I remember my friend told me that one woman said that she had been begging for somebody to for medical attention for her baby who was really sick, and didn't get it until the baby was nonstop projectile vomiting. We've heard some pretty awful stories um, of what's going on here in El Paso. I also have friends who have been released from detention uh, from uh, from detention centers for trans women, um, locally and in other places that are really, really horrific stories to hear about, like being harassed and denied medical attention, humiliation. It's sick. It's really sad.
With regards to, because obviously there are camps all over the country, and you mentioned, of course, the reason. I mean, El Paso is a very historical passage for migration, but this particular convergence, why is it important that that's happening at El Paso? Is there like are there specific targets that you're looking at, or specific infrastructure that's specific to ICE or CBP that is in El Paso?
It's bad everywhere. It's bad everywhere, especially along the border. But we've seen a lot of really, really horrific things happen in El Paso. We've had children die here in El Paso. We've had trans women illegally detained here in El Paso. We have militias holding children at gunpoint here in El Paso. I think that we also carry that legacy of resistance because of the history of the way that migrants are treated, right? So like this is also where the bath riots happened. So one of the projects that we're working on, as also part of the work that we're doing with this convergence, is a community space that is opening soon here in El Paso. We're calling it Casa Carmelita, and it's named after Carmelita Torres, who led the bath riots. So folks who lived and worked or lived in Juarez would typically come to the United States just to work and then like go home, or they would come for a little while and then, so as migrants would cross the border, they were being subjected to all kinds of awful stuff. So they would be doused in gasoline. They would be forced to to strip down naked. They would be photographed. The women's photographs would be passed around in bars and cantinas by, the people who took them. So they were subjected to, health hazards, humiliation. It was awful. So the bath riots, it was a resistance. People refused to take the gasoline baths. So Carmelita Torres, who was very young, I don't know off the top of my head how young she was, led that resistance. And so I guess for local organizers especially, like she holds a very special place in our heart. And the building that we already have purchased for Casa Carmelita is at the bridge where the bath riots happened. So we're so close to history. It's all around us all the time, every day. And I think that we do, as activists and organizers, feel that responsibility to carry that legacy.
So, just sort of wrapping up with the Casa Carmelita, I'm curious because we see a lot of pushback from authorities. So, for instance, Scott Warren is still on trial for giving water to migrants, and then you also have people that have been arrested for feeding the homeless. And it sounds like you're doing both, and you're doing that for some of the most oppressed people in the United States. Has there been any pushback? Do you expect there to be pushback from authorities?
Absolutely. We've definitely had a lot of pushback. So, as a member of the Tornillo de Occupation Coalition, I participated in an action at the Border Patrol Museum last February. And following that action, 16 of us who were present were charged with, my charge is a criminal trespass, and then I believe 3 of us have that charge. The rest of the 16 people have are facing felony criminal mischief charges. I was on El Paso's Most Wanted for 2 weeks in a row next to people wanted on charges like murder and assault, for a criminal trespass charge. So that was so dramatic. And I also found out that during that time, before my self-surrender, that I was, there was a warrant out for my arrest. They surrounded my old house. They did like this raid kind of thing on the house that I used to live in. They had the wrong address. And they tried to arrest the woman that lives there. So I guess somebody else lives there, a mom, a single mom. And they thought she was me. And they tried to arrest her in front of her children. So they were trying to do that to me. There's definitely been a lot of pushback from local law enforcement. We haven't even opened yet, and there have already been threats. One of our organizers was targeted crazy on social media because of Casa Carmelita. So there are already people on the internet saying that they're going to burn the building down. And, you know, it's absolutely something that we are thinking about. And part of the work and planning that we're doing is thinking about how we're going to stay safe and keep the space safe. So, yeah.
For more information and to support Anna Tiffany's work, visit Food Not Walls on Instagram as well as Tornillo the Occupation on Facebook. Note the address is facebook.com/creative brown resistance. There you'll also find more information about the upcoming border resistance convergence in El Paso this September. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people that you don't know. Reminder, the best way to stay up to date on our work is to sign up for the newsletter at the address below so you don't get lost in the censorship web. To those who have donated, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. Until next week, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch. We got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and said my shove. I'm not a